heard a lot about the word protein today. So at our clinic in Belair, we do find so many people who come in when we do a seeker test on them that they have low skeletal muscle mass for age. So we're quite passionate about trying to ensure people have adequate protein in their diet. So I'll talk a bit today about optimising protein and managing sarcopenia. So yes, I'm Nicole, low carb dietitian, one of the directors of Low Carb Keto Health, and as Peter mentioned, Defeat Diabetes dietitian, and work with an amazing team. So Dr. Lauren Lawler-Smith and our business and certified health coach, Jodie Bund, who's not here today. And we have of course, fantastic practice in Adelaide, where we provide medical and nutritional and coaching services to our clients. We do that face-to-face, and we also do it via video consult. And we run a 3-month low-carb program that includes nutritional lifestyle education. Our clients get weekly touch points with the doctor, myself and our health coach. We have doctor-led metabolic assessments and personalised menu plans that are done. We teach them about using the CGMs and ketone monitoring. They get a low-carb education book and a 12-month access to our community group. So today I'm going to talk a bit about sarcopenia, the outcomes. It's linked to insulin resistance, the causes and the keys to sarcopenia management. And then I'm going to touch on protein, what it is, how much we should be having, when we should be eating protein, and why we're not eating enough. And then I'm going to touch on leucine at the end. So what is sarcopenia? Basically, by definition, it is a syndrome characterised by progressive and generalised loss of skeletal muscle mass and strength, with a risk of adverse outcomes, which is physical disability, poor quality of life, and in the elderly can lead to death. And the diagnosis of sarcopenia is basically a decrease in muscle strength, muscle quality or quantity, and physical performance. So sarcopenia globally is estimated around about 16% of the elderly population worldwide suffer with sarcopenia, and it's particularly higher in patients or people who are unwell versus the general population. And there's a large amount of people with diabetes that have sarcopenia. And sarcopenia can exist at any BMI. So we see a lot of sarcopenic obesity in the clinic, where you've got here someone with, 2 people with a BMI of 29 and yet a significant reduction in muscle mass, which leads to a decline in functionality and increased cardiometabolic risk as well. So it can not just exist in that sort of frail, old, elderly person. And when you look at the traditional model of sarcopenia, it was always looked at as a slow, gradual reduction over as we get older, sort of starting around 40. But there is actually a catabolic crisis going on. And so there's these really large sort of dips that are happening in our muscle mass occurring in periods of 1 to 2 weeks over our lifespan after 40. And that's where we might have broken a leg or a shoulder, or we're in bed with an illness, and or have low activity for extended periods of time. So we get these real significant drops. So there's actually a much more accelerated decline in muscle mass that is happening after the age of 40. And the outcome really is dire with sarcopenia. We have increased depression and dementia. There's increased fragility and osteoporosis, an increased risk therefore of falling and fractures. And there's a 3.5 increased risk of death with the elderly, with people suffering sarcopenia. So it is really a critical health problem. And again, we see it even at younger ages with people coming in and getting our seeker tests with low muscle mass. There's a large amount of clinical evidence that has also just exhibited a correlation with sarcopenia, other diseases such as liver, kidney, endocrine or diabetes. heart disease and cerebral vascular disease. So it is a critical health problem and can be life-threatening. And there is this actual observed connection or relationship between insulin resistance and sarcopenia. So it's a bit of a vicious cycle between the two of these conditions. Firstly, just to summarise a little bit about insulin resistance, the main target organ for insulin is muscle, and glucose uptake and metabolism by the muscle plays a role in healthy glucose regulation in our metabolism. And when you have insulin resistance, you have this reduced responsiveness of the muscle to be able to respond to insulin, and thus we have impaired glucose metabolism. And we know, as it's already been mentioned today, that insulin resistance is the root cause of chronic disease and inflammation. So there are several studies that have actually shown that insulin resistance may be actually an important mechanism creating sarcopenia or an unhealthy muscle where you're getting reduced muscle size, strength and functionality. So insulin resistance is playing a role in making our muscles unhealthy, and also sarcopenia or unhealthy muscles are playing a role in creating insulin resistance. If you can see in the tiny writing there, I've just popped a paper which explains some possible mechanisms for why insulin resistance is causing issues with creating unhealthy muscles. There is the possible mechanisms when you've got insulin resistance is there's this increase in protein breakdown and a reduction in protein synthesis. So we're getting, unhealthy muscles via insulin resistance by not able to absorb and build muscle. There seems to be a role of autophagy in the muscle and cell death with insulin resistance, and an increase in these FOXO group of proteins. And this particular group of proteins does a whole lot of stuff in the body, and I'm not overly versed in it, but they are involved in increasing protein degradation. So insulin resistance through these possible mechanisms are giving us unhealthy muscles that are weaker and don't function as well. So insulin resistance is in some ways inducing sarcopenia, and there are several studies showing this. The Fujita study showed insulin played an important role in promoting muscle synthesis and inhibiting protein catabolism, or the breakdown of breakdown of muscle. Actually showed people with type 1 diabetes without absolute insulin increased nitrogen excretion and amino acid breakdown, which was reversed when insulin was therefore injected. So again, showing how it's involved in, keeping a muscle healthy or not healthy. McCain did a study where they also observed after exogenous insulin injections that there was an increased muscle protein synthesis and a reduced amount of free amino acids floating around. So we're just seeing some connections with how insulin resistance impacts our muscle health. We've also got sarcopenia, or poor muscle health, inducing some insulin-resistant issues. And again, this particular paper indicated a few possible mechanisms as to why a unhealthy muscle, a sarcopenic muscle, could be impacting our insulin sensitivity in our muscle. And one of those was having some fat accumulation or myosteatosis in the muscle. And so this extra fat in the muscle, a bit like a marbled steak, was infecting insulin signaling and damaging the cells in the muscle and impairing muscle function. So again, the unhealthy muscle creating this, insulin resistance. There was some link with branched chain amino acid levels in the muscle, and they found that there were some increased branched chain amino acids catabolism, and this seemed to have some impact on the insulin sensitivity of the muscle. They also found in people with type 2 diabetes that they had a reduced number of type 1 muscle fibres. And type 1 muscle fibres are very metabolically active muscle fibres, so are really important for that sort of glucose metabolism. And so type 2 had a lower number of these, and so therefore was indicating that perhaps why the muscles were also more insulin resistant, because people with these sort of muscle sarcopenia or unhealthy muscles seem to have less of these metabolically active fibres. We have a bit of a vicious cycle going where we've got poor muscle health impacting insulin resistance, and the vice versa. So as we're getting older and we're not metabolically well and we're getting sarcopenia, you can see how this becomes a bit of a health crisis. So overall, things that are impacting muscle health, as we've already talked about, is insulin resistance can be impacting the health of our muscle, age, inflammation, chronic disease, and obesity, which kind of all come together. Low vitamin D, which impacts how much calcium's in our system, and calcium's really important for contraction and healthy muscles. Inactivity and, of course, inadequate protein in the diet. And that's what I sort of want to start to talk about now. It is really a key nutrient that we need for muscle synthesis. And as we get older, unfortunately, the only way we can build strong and healthy muscles is with protein and resistance training. When we're younger, we have the hormones helping us out. But once we're older, we're only left with protein and exercise. So we'll talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of protein. And protein is a complex molecule. It's made up of lots of essential amino acids, which are all linked together with peptide bonds, and they're very important for the function and regulation of cells, tissues, and organs. So this is a chain of amino acids stuck together with peptide bonds, and that's what makes up protein. And there are 20 amino acids, and 9 of them are essential. And they cannot be synthesised by our body, so we must consume them in our diet. 3 of them are called branch chain, and these are kind of important guys for helping us with muscle synthesis. So there's our list of the 9 essential, and the isoleucine, leucine and valine are our 3 branch chain. And leucine's kind of, I'm a fan of leucine. It's really, really important for muscle synthesis. To ensure that we get our 9 essential amino acids, we need to eat animal food. So I think we've heard that happening, that discussion today. Animal foods are nutritionally complete with all those essential amino acids, so we need to be eating our animal foods. If we are vegan, then there are some plant foods that do contain or are nutritionally complete and contain the 9 essential amino acids. So our soybeans and soy, our hemp and chia seeds, spirulina and nutritional yeast. Nutritional yeast has 50 grams of protein per 100 grams. So including these regularly in the diet is important. Some other sources there I've mentioned which are higher in carbohydrates. So obviously in clinic the trend is we try to opt for those sources that are lower carb. And there are other plant sources that contain protein, but they don't contain all 9 essential amino acids. So therefore if you're vegan, you need to be consuming a variety of protein sources. So here's a list of different sort of proteins, I guess, for vegan clients. And, we've got legumes, nuts and chia seeds and seeds in general, whole grain, soy, green vegetables, nutritional yeast, seitan, spirulina and hemp protein. Obviously, the legumes and the whole grains are a little bit higher in carbohydrates, so we try to opt for the other protein sources as much as we can. I'll briefly discuss in terms of what is protein. We know protein is important for structural support, so things like our collagen and skin and bones, muscle protein synthesis, which is, I guess, our passion in the clinic to get people's muscles stronger, digestive enzymes and enzyme processes, important for transport in the body, like hemoglobin transporting oxygen and transferrin transporting iron. The insulin for signalling, defense mechanisms. Protein's important for all these things, so we really need to be eating protein. How much should we be having? This has been touched on today. So the sort of recommended dietary allowance is projected as a 0.8 gram per kilogram of body weight. and you listen to a lot of experts out there, including Dr. Don Lehman. He's done a lot of research, and the way we've measured the 0.8 is quite inaccurate. So really this is the minimum daily average requirement that we should be consuming. And for healthy individuals, and the large amount of the population isn't healthy, and we all have different needs based on age and how much activity we do. So really we consider this as a minimum, not a maximum. So there's a lot of evidence out there showing different levels of protein needs. This particular article or journal showed the protein needs for healthy older adults sat between 1 to 1.2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight for older healthy adults, and up to 1.2 to 1.5 for older people with illness. So we're seeing an increased need above the 0.8. The American College of Sports Medicine and the Dietitians of Canada, the protein needs for highly older active adults sat between 1.2 to 1.7 grams per kilo of body weight. So again, far higher than the 0.8. So there's definitely good consensus out there for most populations with different needs, whether you're older, whether you're not well, whether you're all active, is there's an increased protein need, which many people aren't meeting. So most healthy humans, as Finney in the studies he's done, said most healthy humans maintain good lean body mass and function during a ketogenic diet between 1.5 to 1.75. And at our practice, we do a range of 1.2 to 1.5 to 1.8, depending on activity levels of our clients that come through the door. So you can sort of start to make some calculations as to how much protein you might need. We use the Verta Health data for our protein, calculations for our clients that come in. And so the other thing is, when we talk about how much protein, 100 grams of steak is not 100 grams of protein. And it's quite interesting. So many clients come in and they go, yep, I'm eating all my protein. I've got my 100 gram steak at night. And they think they've nailed their 100 grams of protein. So this just shows us in terms of what 30 grams of protein looks like. And that's equivalent to anything from a whole chicken breast to 150 grams steak to up to 4 eggs. So that's what 30 grams of protein looks like. So if you're starting to need to get 90 to 100, you can start to do the calculation. We can see here again 30 grams of protein, 6 slices of cheese, a cup and a quarter of yogurt, a cup of nuts, a cup of tofu, a cup and a half of beans, or a scoop of whey protein. So the question I'm always asking my clients in clinic is, are you eating enough protein? They're doing low carb, they're focused on fat, and they tend to forget about protein. So if you need 90 grams of protein a day, I always ask them, do you think you're eating enough protein? And most of them aren't. The other concern with protein is, is it dangerous to eat more protein? The protein content of the diet is not related to a progressive decline in kidney function with age. This has been shown. There are no adverse effects to a healthy kidney if you eat more protein. Some studies that did show some adverse effects were actually conducted on dialysis patients that didn't have healthy kidneys, so therefore we can't take that into account when we're looking at healthy kidneys to manage protein. So how much protein per meal? And there's a lot of, again, Dr. Don Lehman does some great stuff, and Finney as well. How much protein per meal? I use this particular study by Simmons. He took a younger and an older group. So the older group was 65 to 80, the younger group 30 to 40. And fed them intact protein. So one group they firstly got 30 grams of protein, which they consumed with 120 grams steak, and then they were fed a higher amount of protein, or 90 grams, and they were lucky to get the 350 gram steak. So the young and the old group were fed two different amounts of protein. Muscle biopsies were taken, and they measured fasting muscle synthesis, and then they measured it after they ate the 30 gram or the 90 gram amount of protein. So what we can see here is the young group is the pink and the old group is the purple. And what you can see is when the 30-gram amount of protein was consumed, both the old and the younger group did actually very well. They both increased their muscle protein synthesis. And what was interesting in both the old and the young group, they were actually able to, the older group was actually able to increase their muscle synthesis just as well as the younger group. So there's hope for us older people if you can consume adequate protein. And then what they did is they fed the 90 gram bolus of protein with the big 350 gram steak. And what you see is, again, the old and the young group still were able to increase a good amount of muscle synthesis, and it was similar. But what you see is there was no difference between the 30 gram and the 90 gram protein intake. And so what this is sort of showing us, and there's a lot of research showing this, is that there seems to be a bit of a sweet spot. Once you consume a certain amount of protein, beyond that, you're not really getting any benefits. And there is depending on what sort of research you're reading, this may vary from anywhere to 30, and Dr. Lehman is talking about up as maybe 40 or 50, that there seems to be a sweet spot. So anywhere between 30 and 50 might be the consensus for how much we can utilise. But in this particular study, showing that we don't get any more benefits from going higher than that particular 30 grams. When you add exercise, I think that's been advised that it's so important, and it further synergistically increases the amount of muscle synthesis if we're combining that with an adequate 30-gram bolus of protein. So we need to eat our protein in at least that 30-gram minimum in a meal, and we need to be adding exercise. There is an age, I guess reality is there's an age-related dose response. So what they did here is, again, they fed a sort of 25-gram bolus of protein in the young and the old group, and they got similar muscle protein synthesis. But then what happened, they fed them a suboptimal amount of protein. So they only fed them 15 grams. And this is where you see a big difference between the older group and the younger group. And the older group, unfortunately, did far worse. And this is where we see that reflecting in, as, our grandparents are eating that, as we can see there, a bowl of porridge made with some milk, and they're maybe only getting 13 grams of protein in their breakfast, and they're just not able to adequately get muscle synthesis as good as they could if they got more protein in. So there's definitely a big impact as we get older, or if we're getting suboptimal levels of protein in our diet. And when should we be eating this protein? And what you can see here is in a typical diet, we'd often be having a small serve of protein, particularly if you're not a low carber, having a small amount of protein in the morning, 15 grams at lunch, and then 65 grams, and enjoying that really large steak in the evening. And what we can see here is there's definitely muscle synthesis going on, but they're not maximising that rate of protein sort of synthesis at that sort of breakfast and that lunch. And then at the end of the day, they're not utilising that whole 65-gram load if we refer back to the study where we're looking at that 30-gram sort of sweet spot. So over the day, they've taken in this particular study 90 grams of protein, but they're only able to effectively utilise 55. And then we look at this where they've actually distributed the protein more evenly based on that 30 grams sort of bolus, and we're getting better maximal, maximising that rate of synthesis over the 24-hour period. So consuming 90 grams and able to use that 90 grams, because if you're having that sort of 60 gram or 65 gram huge steak at the end of the day, you can't store that for later. It's sort of broken down. So it just shows here greater 24-hour protein synthesis response by actually distributing it evenly. And this study shows the same thing. If we've got skewed protein versus more evenly distributed protein, you can see the skewed protein over 24 hours gave a 25% less muscle synthesis response. So if we're looking at 30 grams of protein, because I always love coloured pictures, and we have lots of coloured pictures in our clinic, and I won't spend long on it because I'm probably going to go over time, this is what 30 grams of protein looks like per meal if you're eating animal protein to optimise your muscle protein synthesis. So you can see a couple of eggs, 3 slices of cheese, some bacon, nice steak at the end of the day. And we know we add some exercise, we're going to further accelerate the improvement in our muscle synthesis. When we look at if you're a vegan and you're doing a plant-based diet, there's a lot more volume here, is the point of these pictures, is we have to eat a lot more to try and consume that 30 grams of protein. And, you don't actually end up absorbing all of that protein. Not all the protein that is here is bioavailable because of all the fibre. So you might find that 30 gram protein breakfast, you might only absorb 15 or 20 grams of that because it's not as bioavailable as animal protein. So why is protein intake so low? And if we can see here in the 1980s, we get a massive increase in carbohydrate and obesity. And what happened in the 1980s? Well, we can see that, this is, I don't need to talk more about it. This was introduced, and that's why we have sad little muscles. And why is protein intake so low? And we know why. So, in the end, carbohydrates need to make room for more protein. And I want to touch on leucine. It's a branched chain amino acid that really is the kicker for increasing our muscle synthesis, and it activates mTOR, which is kind of the key to making our muscles grow. This particular study, they took an older group who ingested a suboptimal level of protein, only 10 grams. They enriched it with leucine, about 3 grams. I've seen 3 to 5 grams in different studies. And it mounted an increase in protein synthesis similar to the higher protein intake group. So it's just sort of really, showing how important leucine is as one of our branched chain amino acids. And we get leucine, obviously, in animal food. I think there's a lot more research that will be in this area too, for particularly our elderly population that are getting fed porridge and sandwiches and soup, and Meals on Wheels and in nursing homes. And it also helped me think about, fasting is something we do in our practice, and I do myself, is to how we can maximise our muscle synthesis if we are fasting, or maybe not eating always that correct amount of 30 grams of protein. And I use leucine myself, throw it in my yogurt or my smoothies. But you can certainly get it from your meat, chicken and fish. So, leucine is really important. Dr. Don Lehman talks about maximising actually having your leucine hit in the morning and in the evening, because it then activates mTOR, and so you get good muscle protein synthesis overnight as well as in the morning through the rest of the day. So, it makes the intermittent fasting something we need to be thinking about. And very finally, because me and Lorraine have been having this discussion about protein and fasting, and this particular journal came out that Lorraine kindly flicked to me this morning. But it just sort of showed that there was some calorie restriction giving some positive effects on skeletal muscle. So I guess my thought process now is that we need to be ensuring if we are fasting, that we're really ensuring we're getting leucine and that we're maximising the quality and quantity of the protein we're eating, the timing and the amounts, and that we're not calorie restricting or fasting too frequently. So in summary, sarcopenia is dire. It can occur at any BMI. We should be prioritising our protein at 30 grams of protein per meal at least. And if you listen to other information and look at other studies, that maybe is up to as high as 40 or 50 as we get older is needed. But we need to have those boluses and not wait all day and have all of our protein in one hit. Suboptimal protein is a big problem. Distributing it evenly is definitely important, as we showed in the studies. 100 grams of steak is not 100 grams of protein. Leucine is a gun, and you should be consuming it regularly. And resistance exercise is really important. So thank you.